Well, welcome back. We're going to talk about this time the martyrdom of the prophet Joseph Smith and his brother Hyrum Smith. Our year is 1844, and I'm going to talk about the last 20 days of his life, so June 7th to June 27th. Well, with that, let us begin. What you're looking at is Carthage Jail in Carthage, Illinois. Carthage is the county seat of Hancock County and continues to be the largest town in that county in Illinois. We turn now, because we're at the year 1844, to the prophet Joseph Smith. In 1844, Joseph Smith was running for president of these United States. There were 26 states. There was the Whig Party, the Democratic Party, and Joseph now has formed his own party. And would he have won if he had lived? Oh, it's been debated for years. Not sure. But he is running for president of these United States. In addition, Joseph Smith is mayor of what at the time was one of the largest towns in all of Illinois. Some claim that it rivals Chicago. What is known for sure is that at that time it was larger than Carthage and was the largest town in Hancock County. Well, as we begin, the date we begin is June 7th, 1844. June 7th, 1844, for the first time in the history of Nauvoo, there was a newspaper published against Joseph Smith, against the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which demanded now that Nauvoo, the charter which made Nauvoo a city in Illinois, that it be revoked. One of the head proprietors was named William Law. William Law at one point was in the first presidency of the church with Joseph Smith. Joseph had had an occasion to call him in and to ask him to repent. Obviously, there are several ways to be able to accept that prophetic counsel, and in his case was to turn his heel up against Joseph. Notice the title of his newspaper. It's Nauvoo Expositor. In other words, he wants to expose Joseph Smith for the charlatan he believes he is. He wants to expose any fallacy in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And he demands now that the charter that makes Nauvoo a city in Illinois be taken off the books. And as this now happens on June 7th, we turn ourselves to June 8th. On June 8th, Joseph Smith, acting in his role as mayor of Nauvoo, will now call an emergency meeting at the Nauvoo City Council. Most believe that that emergency meeting took place in what is called Joseph Smith's Little Red Brick Store. Now, if you've been to Nauvoo, you will note that most of the places there are built of red brick. But in the case of this store, what makes it different is that this store inside, that the walls were painted with ox blood and a combination of buttermilk and came up with kind of a red color. So the store was not just red on the outside, it was red on the inside. If indeed that the mayor and the city council met in Joseph Smith's red brick store on Water Street, there in Nauvoo, they would meet on the second floor. Now, the second floor I would call sacred space. That's where Joseph first introduced the endowment in this dispensation, where couples were sealed for all eternity, where the Relief Society was organized, the Book of Abraham, then translated. And you'd say on June 8th, then, an emergency meeting of the Nauvoo City Council. The question to be addressed by the council was, what do we do about the Nauvoo Expositor newspaper? Now, you realize it's a big issue. There had never been an anti-newspaper published in town, and the mere fact that it's calling for to get rid of the charter there in Nauvoo is a big issue for Joseph as mayor. There was deliberation back and forth, Actually, eventually it comes down to a Bill of Rights issue. Freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and at the end of June 8th, no decision was made. On June 9th is a Sunday in 1844. For Latter-day Saints, for Sunday worship, although they had 10 wards in town and satellite branches outside of Nauvoo, they didn't have regular, quote, ward meetings. And so on Sundays, many times they would gather around the walls of the Nauvoo temple. Sometimes they would gather in groves. In this case, on June 9th, on the Sunday, that Hyrum Smith was asked to speak to those who had gathered. And notice it's not the prophet Joseph. Joseph was home. He was suffering from what they used to call back then lung fever. And so Hyrum then will give the speech. No doubt there were people in town wondering about the Nauvoo Expositor, but obviously it's Sunday and nothing official was done. On June 10th, 1844, on the Monday, early in the morning, Joseph will again call for a meeting of the Nauvoo City Council. The Nauvoo City Council will deliberate once again on the issue of the Nauvoo Expositor. Should that newspaper be allowed to print on the streets of Nauvoo? There was much discussion. Some will say if you combine the 8th and the 10th, you've got nearly 14 hours or more of deliberation as they try to reach a decision. Finally, a decision is reached. It's not completely unanimous, what Joseph had wanted, but the decision is that the Nauvoo Expositor must no longer print on the streets of Nauvoo. A sheriff was now called for. There were many policemen in town. They actually had a police force. They had the Nauvoo Legion. But the head sheriff was John P. Green. He's a brother-in-law of Brigham Young. He joined the church way back in the early days, back then in Mendon, New York. He's been with the prophet Joseph, and for John P. Green, he is now authorized to stop the publication of the Nauvoo Expositor. For John P. Green, with that, he now begins to go through the town and to ask, is there anybody that wants to join me to stop the printing of the Nauvoo Expositor? The result will be is that literally 350 men now jump in and say, I'm with you. For some, they've grabbed bullets to put over their chest, almost like Pancho Villa. They've got knives. They're all excited. And they head down to the Nauvoo Expositor building, which was one of the main shopping districts in Nauvoo on Mulholland Avenue. As they arrive there, they not only break down the door, but they break the glass windows. Now, the most expensive thing back then of any building was always the glass windows. And they break the glass windows. They go into where the press was. They destroy the press. They take the little boxes of type. They take them out to the street. They literally destroy the type so that an I will never print like an I again, and an E like an E again. And some would say they had a wonderful time, and others will say they had a riotous time. Now, you can imagine 350 men that all converge on one store in town, the press. Obviously, they've made a mess of everything. Some will say that they found the second edition of the Nauvoo Expositor, and they destroyed the second edition. So all we have left today is that first edition. As they finish destroying building as well as press and type, the men, under the direction of Brother Green, now head to the Mansion House. Now, the Mansion House, people back then, they used to name their houses, much like we name pets, children kind of thing. But Joseph had named this house his Mansion House. he had a porch above the front door that he could come out on. As he heard all this noise of men coming through the street, he comes out on the front porch. They're at the second story. And as he does so, he can hear the voice of John P. Green above the kind of crowd of men. And as he hears the voice of John P. Green, John says that the Nauvoo Expositor will never publish again. Joseph Smith was reported to have on his hat. He took off his hat, he waved it above his head, and he said, "Hurrah, hurrah, hurrah for the house of Israel," and did it 3 times, and then asked the men to go home. We've now made it to June 11th. June 11th, 1844, the proprietors, including William Law and others, are now up and they're ready to head to their press, the Nauvoo Expositor, and they're ready to belch out a second edition. Imagine their surprise as they come to work only to find type in the street, the press, the doors literally knocked down in their building, and the second edition completely destroyed. Now, at this point, the proprietors set fire to their building. Now, as they set fire to their building, they now get on horseback, and they are rushing to Carthage, which you recall, it's the county seat. They want help, and they're rushing to Carthage. In the meantime, Latter-day Saints, June 11th, 1844, suddenly you've got a fire in a business district, a fire on a home, on a farm, anywhere scary, right? But a fire in a business district, many of those buildings very, very close together, some sharing common walls. And if you want to destroy the entire economy of a town, don't light a fire in a house, you light it there in the business district. So with the fire now blazing, how the town is alerted is that they didn't have like a regular, you'd say, a fire brigade, fire department, but women or men would come to the doors of their home when they saw the smoke, and they would ring the dinner bells. When dinner bells were rung at an odd hour, it meant grab your bucket and run to wherever, you're following the smoke, you're following the flames. And then what they would do to be able to put out the fire, they would form a chain of people, and it's a circular chain. So at the end, you might never, ever get back your regular bucket, but everybody has a bucket, and they would have a part of the chain down that went all the way down to the Mississippi, and you would pass the water up, and then the one closest to the fire would then throw the water and would rotate over to the next. So it was a constant movement so that nobody was the one who was always close to the fire. Well, they succeeded in getting the fire out, but now we come to June 12th. June 12th, 1844, Joseph Smith is at his home there, the Mansion House in Nauvoo. As he's at his home on June 12th, 44, there's a knock on the door. He answers it, and it's Sheriff Bettysworth from Carthage. In other words, Carthage, you're like a county sheriff. And Sheriff Bettysworth, Joseph knows the man. In fact, he had married Sheriff Bettysworth to his bride. And so you get some niceties shared until Sheriff Bettysworth now passes to Joseph an arrest warrant. Well, for many of us, if we received an arrest warrant, we'd be like, I need to lay down, where's the bathroom? But in the case of Joseph, we can identify 38 different times that he's had an arrest warrant handed to him. Joseph's smart enough to now look through the arrest warrant. As he does so, it's on a printed piece of paper. In other words, most of the words are the very same that will be given to somebody else who's being arrested. But there are blanks to fill in. As the blanks are filled in, the names of the accused, Joseph Smith, Hyrum Smith. Well, what's the charge as the blank there is filled in? And the charge is starting a riot on the streets of Nauvoo that led to the destruction and then fire of the Nauvoo Expositor. Well, Joseph now looks over this and indicates that he would like to hold court right away. He sees it as a misunderstanding. And so court will now be held in Judge Aaron Johnson's home that you see here on Water Street. It's just down the street from the prophet Joseph's house. Now, he realized court back then, Judge Johnson, he's a justice of the peace. He was living in his ward and was literally elected by the male members of his ward to be the justice of the peace. So that's his credentials. And Aaron Johnson, he is asked, can you hold court today? And for Joseph, the mayor, the prophet, hey, clear the docket. Yes, I can hold court for you as well as Hyrum. Well, the court will go forward. Aaron Johnson will listen. As he listens, Joseph testifies, Hyrum testifies. Entire city council have something to say. It was due process of law. The deliberation, you'd say, John P. Green, very upset. He's concluding, if anybody's in the wrong, it's me, it's not them. And I couldn't control all the men. And Aaron Johnson hits the gavel and says, Joseph, Hyrum, you're free men. That nothing that you did led to a riot on the streets of Nauvoo or the fire. So by June 12th, Joseph's a free man. June 13th, Joseph's now at home again. It's the mansion house, remember? As he's at home, to his surprise, here now comes again Sheriff Bettysworth. As he now comes, he's got another arrest warrant. It's on the same printed form. Filled in the blank, who's being charged? Joseph and Hyrum. What are you being charged with? Another filled in the blank. Rioting on the streets of Nauvoo as it relates to the destruction and fire set to the Nauvoo Expositor building. Well, Joseph, as he looks over the arrest warrant, he concludes that perhaps yesterday, because he appeared before Aaron Johnson, a faithful Latter-day Saint, a man who was on the High Council, a man who would go west, his posterity have done so many amazing things in the church. Joseph concludes because he went to Aaron Johnson, maybe it would be better with this arrest warrant if he went to see Judge Daniel H. Wells. Now, Daniel H. Wells, he had lived in what was called Commerce, and now Nauvoo, before the saints had ever been there. And you'd say he has a big reputation. He's not a member of the church. He was so impressed, though, with the church that he actually gave Joseph Smith the 4 acres on which the Nauvoo Temple was built, which was part of his property and his home still there in Nauvoo. So at his home now, it's the same court scene. Joseph, Hyrum, entire city council, but also being accused in this arrest warrant is the entire city council. And everybody's swearing to tell the truth. But in the case, as Daniel H. Wells now listens to the prophet Joseph, who swears to tell the truth, the result will be, not only does Daniel H. Wells say, hey, Joseph, Hyrum, entire city council, you are free men, but he indicates that he is now ready to be baptized. As far as we can tell, Daniel H. Wells was the prophet's last convert. And you'd say, if you're going to have a last one, oh, he's such a good choice. He will live to be in the first presidency of the church with Brigham Young. So notice, even though Joseph and Hyrum have been acquitted twice, and now the entire city council, June 13th is different, as Joseph now leaves Daniel H. Wells. What he wants is he wants men that are young adults that have a horse to come to his home at the mansion house. And what he has for them is he has an assignment. He wants them to fan out through the United States, the 26 states, and to find me the 12. Now, Joseph has 2 members of the 12 in Nauvoo. So John Taylor, Willard Richards, they're in town. But Joseph wants the other 10. And where are they? Well, they're all serving as political volunteers for Joseph's bid for president of these United States. So where can we say that they are on June 13th, 1844? Brigham Young, he's in the Boston area with Wilford Woodruff. Orson Pratt, well, he's down in Washington, D.C. William Smith, he's up in Michigan. Parley's somewhere in Illinois. And notice the word 12, when you're called to an apostle, it means man who is sent. And so they've been sent out. And for the first time in the history of Joseph Smith is the only time that he says, I want all of the 12 home. Now, to the young men that accepted, and literally by horseback or going everywhere, we applaud them for sure. But by June 27th, they have not found one member of the 12. In other words, they were not able to locate Parley or Brigham or Wilford or Orson or others. And you'd say, so none of the 12, other than the ones in Nauvoo, John Taylor and Willard Richards, could be with Joseph during his final days. We now go to June 14th to 17th, 1844. Notice these days are put together. It's not like each day is the same, but in essence, they're all doing similar things from the 14th to the 17th. For fathers that came to see Joseph, whose sons were now literally flying on their horses through the United States, the father said to Joseph, you needed my son, do you need me too? And at this point, in every single case, Joseph will say to the father, I call you on a mission, and I call you on a mission to Carthage. Now, if you were to say, where would you never want a mission call in June of 44? And I'd say, it's to Carthage. you don't want to go there. You got the malcontents. You want people are there who want Joseph dead. And the credit to 100 of these fathers, they said, you want me in Carthage, I go. Now, notice they were not called to baptize, to convert, but they were called to change public opinion about the prophet Joseph and about the church. In some sense, we could say like they were like our first public affairs missionaries as they now headed out. If the man came to Joseph and be on the 14th through 17th and said, what can I do to help? If he were over age 45 and had graying hair, Joseph would ask if he could write. And then he would ask the man, I want you to write letters. I want you to write letters to congressmen, to relatives, wherever you are, to the President of the United States. I want you to mostly write to our governor, Thomas Ford, and to tell him that we're in trouble in Nauvoo. We feel like we're facing an all-out war. Now, to the credit of literally hundreds and hundreds of men in Nauvoo, they're sending out a barrage of letters. For the women, they're also told the same thing. If they were unable to read, write, they would sign an X, and they would have friends that would then sign and send the letters out to loved ones as well as political leaders. Now, for many people, they'll say, well, I only know the name of my relative that knew Joseph Smith. And I'd say, oh, you're looking for letters. When were they written? From the 14th to the 17th, that share not only are we in trouble, but also share their testimony that Joseph Smith was a prophet of God. Well, Joseph now receives word on June 18th, 1844, that the men who were, quote, mail carriers, meaning they were carrying letters, were now stopped by what was forming as a line of aggression leading to Nauvoo. Now, you realize, if a mailman comes to my house and I stop the mailman and would not allow him to deliver letters or packages to your house, it's a federal offense. And as Joseph now learns that no letters are going out anymore from Nauvoo, he puts on his Nauvoo Legion uniform. And next to what was being built, the Nauvoo house, was a small platform. Joseph will take his sword from his sheath, he will lift it up, and he will indicate that he will protect Nauvoo, and he will give his life if necessary. Now, from June 18th, Nauvoo is under martial law, which means children that used to go to school, not today. Means you had private piano lessons, not today. There was a curfew on. Women are not walking the streets after dark. Houses, in some cases, are being boarded up. And Joseph calls for a line of defense to try and stop the line of aggression. Now, how you make a line of defense, it's not just men that line up, but you take these wagons, usually without covers on them, and you turn them over. As you turn them over, you can make a wall, and I turn over a wagon, you turn over a wagon, we get a shovel and we dig and we can connect it almost as if we have made a long wall. And then if nobody advances forward, you can take the wagons, roll them a few more feet, a few more yards, and make another wall. So we've got a line of defense, there's a line of aggression, and there are gunshots going off occasionally, but it's just to let those on either side of the issue know we're still here. And in between the line of aggression and line of defense, you now have what you would call like no man's land. Nobody's walking out. And Joseph says to the Nauvoo Legion, who are now in charge, he says, do not break your line of defense, but there are two exceptions. One exception is if anybody sees a member of the 12. In other words, you see Brigham Young, you break your line of defense and you let him come in. You see Parley P. Pratt, break the line, let him come in. Wilford, break the line, let him come in. But the only other exception, so notice, if you're a missionary returning back to Nauvoo, would you be allowed in town? And the answer is no. We've got a line of defense. You get members of the 12 can come in. The other exception is if there's any word from Governor Thomas Ford. And so it's a stalemate back and forth until June 22nd, 1844. Men will now cross kind of like the no man's land, and as they come to the line of defense, they indicate that they are a military escort, that Thomas Ford has left the capital of Illinois. They're in Springfield, and that Thomas Ford has taken up his residence in Carthage. So notice, despite the letters, the invitation to come to Nauvoo, where he is now gone, he's gone to Carthage. Where he is staying, notice he's not with the military escort, is he is staying in the only hotel in town owned by a man named Artois Hamilton. Well, at this point, the military escort is now brought to the mansion house. As it's brought to the mansion house, they are asked, what is their reason? And they now show that they have an arrest warrant. The arrest warrant, it's for Joseph, it's for Hyrum. Charge against them is destruction of the Nauvoo Expositor. Well, there's a real problem. We'd all say double jeopardy, whether we're a lawyer or not. We'd say, you can't do that. But notice it's a different time. Turns out it's a different form. Joseph never goes to meet this military escort. He stays up on the second floor. He hides in a closet. He comes out of the closet. He's shown by his friends the arrest form. Joseph is looking for the loophole. He's looking for what he had found on the other printed form that said he could stand trial before any judge in all of Hancock County. But on this form, there is no loophole. He has to stand trial in Carthage. At this point, Joseph begins to sob. And as he does so, he says, "There is no mercy. There is no mercy here." A decision is made that Joseph will not go with a military escort, but instead will leave the mansion house a different way while the military escort is receiving refreshments from Emma, and that he will get his brother Hyrum, and they will escape over to Iowa, which Iowa is just across the Mississippi River from Nauvoo, and Iowa was a territory. Now, in Iowa, Joseph has many friends. In fact, Joseph had founded 15 towns in Iowa, so there's a lot of Latter-day Saints over there. About 40 or so now gather around him, and the big question is what to do. Some are saying, go back and you've already been acquitted twice, stand trial once again. Others are saying, you go back, you're a dead man. As they talk back and forth, Joseph indicates he sees his way clear, that he and Hyrum will head west, and Joseph has prophesied for years that the saints will be driven to the Rocky Mountains, and there they'll be a mighty people. Suddenly, the whole tenor of their time together changes, and the decision is made, well, you two can't go alone. You need to take with you Orrin Porter Rockwell. Now, Orrin Porter Rockwell was baptized April 6, 1830. He's a pretty interesting man. He has a limp on the left side. His voice never changes. He has a high soprano kind of voice. He is completely illiterate. He cannot read or write, but nevertheless, Latter-day Saints now, while Joseph stays in Iowa, they go back to get Orrin. Orrin then crosses over to the mansion house to be able to see Emma. And he wants to get some clothes, some food, and things for Joseph and Hyrum. It is believed that Orrin then is the first to let Emma know that Joseph will not be returning to Nauvoo and standing trial. For Emma, she will pen a letter, and she will give it to Orrin and no one else. I've always wondered if history could have changed if Orrin could have been a reader and writer. As he now delivers that message in the letter to Joseph, Joseph will read the letter once to himself. He will read it out loud. Many friends will agree with what Emma had to say in the letter. Emma is confident in Thomas Ford, and she thinks that basically don't blow it out of proportion, Joseph. Come back, stand trial in Carthage, all will be well. On this occasion and then thereafter before he leaves Nauvoo, he says, if my life is of no value to my friends, it is of none to me. Though I am innocent before God and the Lamb, I now go as a lamb to the slaughter. On June 24th, notice we're getting closer to the martyrdom. On June 24th, 1844, Joseph leaves the Iowa side of the Mississippi, as does Hyrum, and they cross over to Nauvoo. It's about 6 in the morning. For Hyrum Smith, he will stop to say farewell to his wife, Mary Fielding Smith. His young son, Joseph F. Smith, is awakened. For Hyrum and Mary Fielding Smith, they will take time to read from the book of Ether. It's a very sad parting. For Joseph, as he comes back, he is now saying farewell to Emma. He indicates to Emma that he wishes he had time to give her a priesthood blessing, but he needs to hurry to Carthage. He asks her to write out her blessing, and he will sign it to just send it to Carthage. Well, Joseph now heads out. As he does so, he gets within just a couple of miles of Carthage, and he is turned around by Governor Ford's men. He is told to come back and to disarm the military, the Nauvoo Legion, that had set up the line of defense. He does so, and then by the time he's now heading back to Carthage on the 24th, it's late at night, and he passes by the courthouse. This is the more modern one, but he passes by the courthouse that was there on the square, and then eventually makes it around the corner to the Hamilton Hotel. Notice Joseph and Hyrum are about to register in the Hamilton Hotel. Also in that Hamilton Hotel will be William Law, the owner and proprietor of the now defunct Nauvoo Legion. Thomas Ford, our governor, will also be there in the Hamilton Hotel. As so much noise is being made as Joseph has gone past the square where so many of the military men were at, Governor Ford will come to a bay window and he will shout out at the military and he will tell them, "Go home." In other words, go back to the square. And he says, if Joseph is in this hotel, tomorrow I will bring him with me as I review the troops. We're on June 25th, 1844. Early in the morning, Joseph now heads to the room of Governor Ford. He says to Governor Ford, "I demand an audience." In other words, I'm one of the mayors of now one of your largest towns in Illinois, and in addition, I'm running for president of these United States. Governor Ford said he doesn't have time now, but he will later, and tells Joseph to go back to his room to get Hyrum and to come with him as he reviews the troops. Well, it's the most unusual reviewing of the troops. You've got militiamen that have come from Macon and Quincy and all these little towns around Carthage, and they've set up like a tent city all around the courthouse. Governor Ford is, congratulating them as he's going around, and you'd say for Joseph and Hyrum, it's hard to see them. They've got 40 friends, and the 40 friends, every man back then usually had a walking stick. And so the 40 friends want to make sure that no harm comes to Joseph and Hyrum. And so they take their walking sticks and they swing them in front to the sides of Joseph and the back. So it's almost trying to see Joseph and Hyrum. You're like looking at a strobe light as you get these kind of walking sticks going back and forth. Well, they make it safely around the square. Joseph now comes back to the hotel, as does Governor Ford. He knocks on Ford's door again and says, "Do you have time now?" Governor Ford says yes, and Joseph says, "I just have one question." And the question is, if you were, he goes, "My life, Hyrum's life, we're safe, as long as you stay here in Carthage. But if you were to leave Carthage, even if you were to go to beautiful Nauvoo, which Governor Ford had never seen, will you take us with you?" The governor promises he will. Joseph goes back to his room. The next knock on the door will be the militia leaders. They had been there at the courthouse square. They now are knocking on the door. Joseph opens, and they said, "We couldn't see you. We just wanted to see what you look like." In other words, there was such a barrage of these sticks, we couldn't see you as you passed the square. At which point, Joseph now says to the leaders, "That's not why you've come." He says, "You've come because you seek my blood." He said, "I prophesy because you seek my blood. There will come a day when you will wallow on blood, and that you will see men fall to the right and to the left, and you will be sick of blood." Well, I've had an occasion to research the lives of these militia leaders. Each one will live to be a subordinate somewhere along in the Civil War of the United States. Each one will have an occasion to write to their commanding leaders, "Retreat, retreat. I'm wallowing in blood." That's always the word. And men are falling on the right and the left. So you'd say one of Joseph's last prophecies was to these military leaders. Well, finally on the 25th, Joseph now goes to the courthouse. As he goes to the courthouse, he wants to speak with the judge and wants to know, "Can you hold court today? It's my third time. I've been acquitted twice." And the judge now indicates that he's busy. He can't possibly hold court, he said, but they could post bail. Now, the bail suggested for Joseph and Hyrum was $1,000. $1,000 big money today, but huge money back then. when acres of land could literally be bought for a few dollars. But for Joseph, Hyrum, they don't have the money, but their friends with them do. They put the money on the judge's desk, at which point the judge indicates that he will accept the bail, but that they are under house arrest, and they are under house arrest at the Hamilton Hotel. So they left the hotel as free men. They've now returned to the hotel as now under house arrest. While under house arrest, a new arrest warrant is given against Joseph and Hyrum. The charge against these two men is treason against the United States. Now, of all the charges in the United States, wow, that's the worst. That's if you're playing an old game of Monopoly, it's do not pass go, you go directly to jail. So the night of the 25th, Joseph, Hyrum, and several friends will accompany them and will spend the night in the debtor's cell. The next morning, June 26, 1844, Joseph has many visitors throughout the day, perhaps none more important than the head of the state, Governor Thomas Ford. As Thomas Ford comes to visit them, Joseph says to him, "I just have one question for you, Governor. If you were to leave Carthage and to go to, say you go to Nauvoo, will you take Hyrum and I with you?" And Governor Ford says yes. One of the visitors I find so interesting was Uncle John Smith, a man that's been a patriarch, a man that's been a stake president in Adamandayama and Zarahemla, Iowa, and he's now visiting his nephews, Joseph and Hyrum. He asks, "What can I do to help?" And Joseph says, "Go get me Alma W. Babbitt." He said, Babbitt, who is an attorney who had the right to practice law in 5 different states, he says, "Get me him." Babbitt has been a stake president in Kirtland. He's now a branch president in a little branch named Ramus, Illinois. But Babbitt is the man that in section 124, he's told to beware of the golden calf. It's interesting, Babbitt wanted Joseph to take that out of the Revelation, and Joseph refused. Well, his Uncle John Smith leaves the jail with his nephews incarcerated. He goes to Ramus, just a few miles from Carthage. He finds Alma W. Babbitt, and he says to Babbitt, "Joseph and Hyrum are in Carthage jail." At which point Babbitt says he knows. And Uncle John says, "Oh, good, Joseph sent me. He wants you to defend him in his court of law." And Babbitt said to Uncle John, "You're too late. I've already been hired by the other side." We are now moving to the day of the martyrdom. It's June 27th, 1844. Joseph wakes up early, June 27th, 1844. Runners have now come to the jail, and they've given Joseph an amazing announcement. The announcement is Governor Ford has left Carthage. And where has he gone? He's gone to Nauvoo, which means now mobs can rule. Throughout the day, Joseph will have many visitors until about 1 o'clock. I don't think it's any coincidence that the last 2 visitors that Joseph and Hyrum have about 1 o'clock on June 27th were John Taylor and Willard Richards, the only members of the 12 not serving a political mission to forward his campaign. They will go with Joseph up into the upper room now of that Carthage jail. While they're in that second story room, we know of 2 things that happens. One, they read from the book of Josephus, an ancient Jewish scholar, and the other was that John Taylor was asked to sing. Why is he asked to sing? He has an amazing tenor voice. But more than that, it's because mobs sing when they're ready to go into action. Now, when I was a kid, my mother taught me my first mob song. 1 little, 2 little, 3 little Indians, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then remember, you sing them backwards. I think she thought she was teaching me my numbers. But once there are no little Indian boys, then it means go get them, we're ready to go. And so as the crowd outside is singing, they're singing a song to the little Hebrew children, that tune. And they're singing, "Where now is the prophet Joseph? Where now is the prophet Joseph, safe in Carthage jail?" And then there's a riotous chorus, and then somebody say, "Hey, I've got a verse. Where now is the patriarch Hyrum? Where now is the patriarch Hyrum, safe in Carthage jail?" And then a riotous laughter, and they're, "Hey, I've got one," until finally they're ready to go. As they're ready to go, you get the room, it's 5:15, and in 1844. For Hyrum, he reaches for a gun, as does Joseph, which they had, couple of the visitors had given them, and they pushed him under the bed. For John Taylor, Willard Richards, they reach for walking sticks. The first to fall will be Hyrum Smith. And as he falls to the ground there in Carthage jail, he says, quote, "I am a dead man." Joseph will say, "My dear brother Hyrum." For John Taylor, he will attempt to get help. He is shot 4 different times. Bullet in his hand, wrist, hip, leg, and John Taylor, however, with enough adrenaline, is able to get up towards the window, and then a bullet, then it's always said, aimed for his heart, hit his watch, and John Taylor is back inside. As he falls back inside, Willard Richards now pushes him towards the bed. He looks up, only to see Joseph Smith at the window with his hands up high, and his last words are, "O Lord my God." He is then shot in the back and falls straight down at the open well. Well, Hyrum is dead. Joseph, 38 and a half years old, a prophet of God, is dead. John Taylor is severely wounded. And Willard Richards, a more junior apostle, sends word back to Nauvoo. Joseph the prophet is dead. Hyrum the patriarch is dead. John Taylor is wounded. I give my word, we will not retaliate. At the funeral of Joseph, this man, William W. Phelps, shares a eulogy in which he has a poem that we now sing, Praise to the Man. Praise to the man who communed with Jehovah. Millions shall know Brother Joseph again. I am so grateful that I am one of those millions. I know that Joseph Smith was a prophet of God. And I say this in Jesus' name. Amen.